So we're going to start here with a keep. So happy to have a hand we can keep on 7. It looks like our opponent's also kept. So hopefully we'll have a good game. Just missing a 2-drop here. But the hand is fine. Inventor's Apprentice, it's great when you can make it a 2/3 immediately, and we just found a 2-drop, so everything is going well. Hopefully we can just run our opponent right over. We're attacking for 2 here. We're going to come in for 4 next turn. So if our opponent doesn't have a turn 2 play, they're just going to be really far behind. And it looks like they don't. So, yep, I'm just going to get in. We'll see if our opponent does something. If not, I think we just want to play the Reckless Racer, and we can just win the game here. So our opponent's got Aether Sphere Harvester. That is a very, very strong card. So if we weren't, I mean, we are very far ahead here. So it's just going to be a question of if it's going to be good enough, basically. So we're going to get in for 6. The question is, do we want to take advantage of the Reckless Racer trigger? So we could discard the land, and then it would mean we wouldn't necessarily be playing the Aeronaut Admiral next turn. But I think that's fine. We'll just discard a land, and we picked up another land. So our opponent's going to go down to 8. We really don't want our opponent to be gaining life, but we can't really help it necessarily. So we're going to play the Admiral. Assume our opponent's going to play a creature here that's going to be able to crew the Harvester. But our opponent's probably going to want to leave the Harvester back on defense, considering what our board looks like at the moment. And so it's just going to be a question of, can we draw something to just push past this Aether Sphere Harvester? So it's going to be a Trophy Mage. Our opponent can crew the Harvester to block. So we actually, as of right now, don't have good attacks, which is pretty unfortunate. But there's a Siege modification, which was basically the best possible draw, or one of them. So that was good. So the question is, what do we want to put it on? I think we want to put it on the Aeronaut Admiral, most likely. So if we put it on the Admiral and attack with everything, our opponent would then be forced to block the Reckless Racer with the Harvester and give it lifelink, and then our opponent would go down to 1. So I think we just throw it on the Admiral for sure. We put it on the Admiral, and I think we just attack our opponent for 6 in the air here. Yeah, and because it's coming through for first strike, if our opponent were to block this, then there would be no way to even gain life, and the Harvester would go away. But it looks like our opponent's still going to crew this Aether Sphere Harvester, which is an interesting choice. So we'll see if our opponent's actually going to block, and it looks like no. So our opponent's all the way down to 2. We'll see if there is some way that our opponent finds to stabilize here. But I would actually be surprised, because if our opponent plays a removal spell, okay, so our opponent does have the removal spell, we actually have exactly lethal. So we can attack with everything. Then our opponent's gonna make the Harvester able to block, but we have the Welder Automaton to ping our opponent for 1, So unless our opponent has something like Select for Inspection, I believe this attack is gonna be enough to get it done. So, yep, we're gonna let this happen. Our opponent's gonna gain 3, but then it's gonna go down to 1, and then we can use the Welder Automaton, and that's gonna finish off the game. So that was actually close. Our opponent almost stabilized there with the Harvester, so we definitely want to board in these decommissions here, because we saw what our opponent's up to, and it's pretty scary stuff. Aether Sphere Harvester, it's just one of the best cards in the format. We definitely want the 2 copies of Decommission. Taking out a land once again because I expect to be on the draw. So the question is, what's the other card that we want to board out for the decommissions? And I think we can afford to shave a 2-drop. It could also be a 3. I think it's close though. Or even the thriving Ibex. I'm fine with just chopping the Ibex. We want to be aggressive. We already know that. So just keeping our low curve creatures is really nice, but this hand just isn't going to work. 2 vehicles and no creatures to crew them, along with 5 lands. We're just going to take a mulligan. And I think we want to keep this 6. And Consulate Dreadnought, that's actually a way for us to steal this game, even though our hand isn't that great. So we're definitely going to keep that card on top. And we can, if we draw that another red, and we still have 8 red sources in our deck, we can throw the modification onto the Dreadnought. And there's a second red, so looks like things are coming together here. So I'm gonna play the Consulate Dreadnought, and we can actually get past the Aether Theorist here. If our opponent does block, we can just Precise Strike, but it looks like our opponent's not going to block. So next turn, we're just going to Modification up the Dreadnought. Hope our opponent doesn't have a removal spell for the Dreadnought. If our opponent does not have a removal or a bounce spell or something like that, we should be able to take this game pretty easily. Just because it's a 10 power creature attacking on turn 3. Like, come on, that's pretty absurd. But if our opponent does have something, then we're probably going to lose. So just being honest here. So definitely don't want to see something like a Select for Inspection, that's for sure. And this appears to be a chump block with the Aether Theorist. So it could be that our opponent has a removal spell that they're going to play, and if that is the case, that would be really annoying. But we're just kind of crossing our fingers. That's what you have to do sometimes. And it looks like, at least right now, there's no removal spell coming. Filigree Familiar is what got searched up with the Trophy Mage. Now the Renegade map, kind of a weird time to sacrifice the map, but our opponent is going to get a swamp. So we'll see if our opponent just wants to continue chump blocking here, and throw the mage in front of the Dreadnought. And it looks like that is what's going to happen. So we're just beating our opponent with this thing. We have no reason to think that our opponent has a removal spell. Maybe our opponent has something like a Malfunction. But things are looking good here. And without removal, like if our opponent plays Filigree Familiar here, it's just now we have Eddy Tailhawk, so we can actually just give this Consulate Dreadnought flying if we want to. So here's a Skyship Plunderer, which can once again chump block, but that's about it. So I'm just going to attack with everything. We don't need to give anything flying because our opponent already has a flyer as their only blocker. So I'm not going to use any energy from the Eddy Tailhawk. And there's another chump block. So now our opponent's fallen down to 11. We'll see now a 5-mana removal spell could work. And it's actually Baral's expertise, so that's actually just about the best thing our opponent could have here. So this could definitely allow our opponent back into the game. And there's the Aether Sphere Harvester. Wow, so that's a real change in events. Thought we were going to definitely take the game on the back of the Dreadnought, but now we've got to regroup, and we're just going to dump our hand again. So play the Dreadnought and the Hawk, and we're just going to put our threats back in play, but right now we don't have enough power to crew the Dreadnought, and our opponent has a Aether Sphere Harvester, and we know about the Filigree Familiar that we was searched for with the Trophy Mage earlier. Here's a Daring Demolition, so that's just going to get rid of the Dreadnought right now. We have no way to save it, so we're forced to just get in there for 2 damage. It's going to drop our opponent down to 9, but once again, we're just kind of flooded now. Even though we're down to 15 lands in our deck, we really need spells. That's just how limited works, and we've drawn more lands than spells up to this point. Here's an Ice Cage, so we can actually bounce the Eddy Tailhawk if we want to, but we'll see if we do. I don't want to do it just yet. So, as expected, the Aether Sphere Harvester, it's going to start coming in. Our opponent does have 4 energy, so expect that energy to go into the Harvester to allow our opponent to gain life. And here's a Freighter, which is quite a good draw because it makes our Apprentice bigger, and it's just a good threat. So we can clock our opponent for 2. And I think we want to bounce this Eddy Tailhawk, get it back into play. And so we basically got everything on the table at this point besides this precise strike in our hand. We cannot crew the Freighter right now, unless we were to, for some reason, precise strike the Eddy Tailhawk, but that's okay. Our opponent's got this Aether Sphere Harvester, 2 cards in hand. We're just kind of hoping that they're not that great and that we can get past our opponent with this Renegade Freighter. And here's an Enraged Giant, so I'm actually just going to slam that guy now that we've drawn him. No need to improvise. We want the Freighter around to be able to attack, but I am going to crew the Freighter with the Inventor's Apprentice and move to combat here. I don't want to attack with the Eddy Tailhawk because it could just get eaten by the Aether Sphere Harvester. There's a Cruel Finality. That's going to be very good here because it's going to allow our opponent to use it on the Freighter, then crew the Harvester, which is now going to be big enough. Even if with the Precise Strike, the Harvester is going to be able to eat the Freighter, just munch on it. And so that's going to mean the Freighter goes away, but our opponent is still going to take the 4 from the Giant. So it's still a pretty close race. The Era of Innovation, it's not really changing too much unless our opponent has a way to trigger it. So our opponent can leave the Harvester back to block. And we'll see if our opponent wants to do that, but we could potentially Precise Strike the Giant to kill this Aether Sphere Harvester. unfortunately, with our freighter being gone, we don't have an artifact to make the Inventor's Apprentice any bigger. So it looks like our opponent is going to keep the Harvester back to block. And so we're just going to get in with the Enraged Giant here. We'll see if our opponent does crew up the Harvester or not. And it looks like the answer is going to be yes. So we're pretty much committed to playing this Precise Strike, trying to get rid of the Harvester. And even the lifelink actually isn't going to matter because our guy has First Strike. And I accidentally did not put the Assembler into play, but I'm going to put it into play here. It's going to make the Inventor's Apprentice bigger. And now we can just crack with everything. And because we have so much energy, I'm definitely going to use it. Give the Apprentice flying. And I think our opponent's just going to be overwhelmed here. And we can also play the Frontline Rebel. So sorry, I was so excited about the Precise Strike, I just forgot to play my other creature. But here's a Whirler Virtuoso. That's actually pretty insane here because it can start machine gunning out. Well, it looks like our opponent's just going to cash in the Era for 3 cards. So unless those 3 cards were something great, and it looks like they were not, we do have this game. I'm going to activate the Cogworker Assembler. We can actually copy the Filigree Familiar. And all of the guys are coming in, that's for sure. And I'm going to give the Giant flying, which should do it here. So yeah, our opponent actually has 0 blocks to survive without something, and it looks like this is going to be